He remains silent. The fading sunlight spills across his chest, highlighting the neat lines of his suit, perfectly composed, just like his demeanor. His lips press into a thin line, unreadable, but his silence speaks louder than any words could. For a moment, it feels like the entire world has gone still, waiting for his response that never comes. Then, his voice finally breaks the quiet, calm but heavy with an undercurrent of disbelief. "And yet you want to have an affair with me." The words hang in the air between them, sharp and precise, cutting through the lingering tension like glass. The golden sky above them glows faintly, as if mirroring the heat of their confrontation. A faint smirk touches his lips, but it doesn't reach his eyes. "Well," he says coolly, "I am apparently as cold as stone in bed." He pauses, letting the weight of his own words settle before continuing, almost mockingly, "An impotent man and a cold piece of stone couldn't ask for a better match, right?" His tone drips with irony, detached, self-deprecating, yet laced with something darker, something bitterly amused. The wind stirs softly, carrying with it the fading warmth of the day. Leaves flutter around them, dancing in the orange glow of sunset. She stands frozen, her breath caught in her throat, eyes locked on him. The distance between them feels impossibly vast, though only a few steps apart. The world around them is quiet, save for the whisper of the breeze, a fragile calm before the storm that neither dares to break. A faint smirk plays across the man's lips, the corner of his mouth curving with amusement. His voice is low but laced with intrigue as he murmurs, "Interesting." The golden light of the afternoon glows softly behind him, painting the moment with a quiet tension. The woman stands frozen for a heartbeat, her eyes widening slightly. She can feel his gaze on her, sharp and unreadable. He speaks again, calmly but with authority. "Go on." Caught off guard, she hesitates, unsure whether to continue or retreat. Her lips part as if to respond, but no words come out. A bead of sweat glides down her cheek. "Ah," a silent exclamation of surprise. Her hands tense at her sides as the air between them thickens with unease and curiosity. Then, his tone shifts, playful, almost teasing. "Perhaps I'll consider whether I'll share a smoke," he says, pausing just long enough for her to look up. His next words fall like a spark in the quiet garden. "Or start an affair with you, Miss Soyoung." The leaves around them flutter gently, as if stirred by the audacity of his words. The man stands tall, confidence radiating from his well-tailored suit. In his hand, he holds a silver cigarette case, his expression calm yet deliberate. The dying sunlight catches his features as he looks at her with that same knowing smile, one that blurs the line between a challenge and an invitation. In the quiet afternoon light, the conversation began casually. One of them mentioned, "Nayoung's very studious and her older sister is an art museum curator, right?" The words carried a tone of admiration, as if they were recounting the achievements of a model family. The other person smiled warmly and replied, "Chairman Ji has raised his daughter well." The compliment seemed sincere, their faces calm and content as they spoke of the Ji family with respect. "He sure has," came the gentle agreement, "and more than anything, Nayoung and our son make such a lovely pair." The remark hung in the air like a hopeful wish for the future, filled with quiet satisfaction. Then, almost as an afterthought, the conversation shifted. "Oh, right," one of them said, recalling another piece of gossip. "Wasn't their oldest daughter getting engaged soon? Did you hear anything when you visited Chairman G's place?" The question was met with a soft clink of porcelain as a teacup touched its saucer. The answer came slowly, understated, but telling. Not really. The simple reply, paired with the faint sound of tea being stirred, left a trace of subtle tension in the air, as though there was more left unsaid beneath the surface of their polite words. The young man sat in silence, his expression calm yet distant. The soft light from the room reflected off his neatly combed dark hair as he lowered his gaze. With quiet conviction, he muttered, "I'm sure it'll happen eventually." His words hung in the air, a fragile attempt at reassurance that couldn't quite hide the uncertainty behind them. He wrapped his fingers around the delicate porcelain teacup, feeling the warmth seep into his skin. The ornate golden patterns on the cup shimmered faintly under the light. "I was wondering why they called me home at such an odd hour," he thought, watching the faint ripples in his untouched tea. "Now I see why." Across from him sat a woman with neatly styled hair and a composed demeanor. Her tone carried both amusement and nostalgia as she said, "Young people these days are so strategic, even when it comes to love." Her words, though casual, carried the weight of observation, as if she were measuring the world that had long moved beyond her understanding. He remained quiet, his face unreadable as he stared at the tea between them. Little does she know, he thought grimly, that their engagement might be called off. The thought echoed in his mind like a secret he didn't yet have the courage to speak aloud. Under the fading glow of the setting sun, the man stood outside, his sharp features hardened by the weight of revelation. Before him, a woman looked up, her voice trembling, but steady enough to deliver the truth. "Nae Young is having an affair with my fiancé." The air grew heavy, and for a moment, even the golden light seemed to dim under the shadow of betrayal. The man stood in quiet contemplation, his arms crossed tightly against his chest as the truth sank in. The faint image of two figures, Dongseng and Naeong, lingered in his mind like a shadow he couldn't erase. His expression hardened, the weight of betrayal evident in his eyes. "So Dongseng is having an affair with Naeong, huh?" he thought, his inner voice calm yet laced with disbelief. The words hung heavy in his mind, echoing louder than he wanted them to. He let out a quiet sigh, his thoughts growing sharper as he reflected on Naeong's character. "I already had a rough idea of what kind of person Naeong is," he admitted to himself, a faint bitterness curling in his chest. "So, I'm not surprised." There was no shock left in him, only the dull confirmation of what he had long suspected. His mind drifted back to the past, to the days of high school when Dongseng had been a timid, unassuming boy. But judging from what he was like back in high school, he thought, narrowing his eyes, I never thought Dongseng had the guts to cheat. The realization was almost absurd to him. The Dongseng he remembered could barely stand up for himself. How could that same person now be entangled in an affair?
In a quiet classroom, bathed in afternoon light, two students sit side by side in their crisp school uniforms. One of them, Yen-hyuk, is focused on his notes, pen in hand, his expression calm and distant. Beside him, his cheerful friend leans closer with a grin, asking, "Hey, Yen-hyuk, want to meet up with girls after class today?" Yen-hyuk doesn't even glance up. His mind is elsewhere, and a simple thought drifts through his head. He's so talkative. The thought continues in a quiet, almost defensive tone. Yen-hyuk clarifies silently to himself, as if correcting any misunderstanding. "With my girlfriend, that is." It's a small statement, but one that hints at something deeper, a desire to distance himself from idle chatter, or maybe to remind himself of where his loyalties lie. Time passes, and the tone darkens. Now, in a moment of bitter reflection, Yen-hyuk's thoughts reveal the turmoil beneath his calm exterior. A woman who's stiff as stone wants to start an affair with me, and the guy who used to act like he'd do anything for me back in high school is now cheating with my girlfriend. The words are heavy with disillusionment, of trust betrayed, and of how easily the past can twist into something cruel. At the kitchen table, a woman with gentle but worried eyes gazes at the young man sitting across from her. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee fills the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of the cookies neatly arranged on a plate between them. Her expression shows both concern and frustration as she leans forward slightly, trying to reach him with her words. "Are you listening, Yenyak?" she asks softly, her tone carrying a mixture of patience and exasperation. But the young man's eyes seem distant, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. Breaking the heavy silence, Yenyak slowly rises from his seat, his chair scraping lightly against the floor. "I have a trial tomorrow, so I'll be heading back now," he says, his voice calm but detached. The teacups rattle faintly as he pushes his chair back, the unfinished conversation lingering in the air. His mother watches him stand, disappointment flickering in her eyes, while his father remains quietly seated, observing the scene without a word. The warmth of the family setting feels muted, overshadowed by the weight of unspoken emotions. As Yenyak leaves, his mother sighs, shaking her head slightly. "Already? Dear, look at him, running off just to avoid his mom's nagging?" she mutters, half annoyed and half concerned. Her husband chuckles softly, setting down his cup. "Let him be, honey. He's probably got a pile of documents to go over before the trial." His words carry quiet understanding, but the faint worry in his eyes suggests he shares his wife's concern that their son is carrying more than just the weight of his work. The young man speaks calmly, but with a teasing glint in his eyes as he turns to his father. "Father, you should take mother out on a date sometime and spend some quality time with her," he suggests, his tone half playful and half sincere. A faint smirk forms on his lips as he adds, "It seems like she likes me more than you recently." His words, though lighthearted, carry a sense of confidence and mischief, making the moment feel both humorous and affectionate. His father looks at him with a mixture of surprise and amusement, momentarily at a loss for words. The mother, standing nearby, seems slightly flustered by the conversation. Her hand lifts to her chin as if she's unsure how to respond, her cheeks showing a faint blush of embarrassment. The father, standing beside her, lets out a small, good-natured laugh and replies warmly, "I'll try my best." His tone is gentle and his smile softens the atmosphere. Between them stands their son, tall and composed, watching the exchange with a faint, knowing smile, like someone who understands both his parents far too well. The older man sits calmly, a gentle smile softening his face. His tone is warm, yet carries a subtle air of expectation as he says, "Anyway, when you get the chance, bring Nayang over for a visit." The moment feels casual on the surface, but there's an underlying weight to his words, something that lingers between politeness and personal longing. The younger man doesn't answer right away. His lips press into a thin line, and silence fills the space where words should be. The panel focuses on the lower half of his face, the tension almost visible in the shadows. The ellipsis in his speech bubble, ... captures everything he cannot bring himself to say. Finally, he straightens and turns away, his footsteps echoing softly, clump, clump. The light from above casts a pale glow over his back as he walks toward the exit. Without looking back, he says quietly, "Well then, I'll head out." The scene fades with a lingering sense of distance, as if something important remains unsaid between them. The man walks away down a quiet corridor, his back straight and posture composed. Dressed in neatly pressed black trousers and a crisp white shirt, he carries his suit jacket casually over one arm. The polished floor reflects his steady steps, and the soft afternoon light filters through the large windows, casting long shadows. His hand slips into his pocket as if lost in thought, each movement calm yet deliberate, like someone who has already made up his mind about something important. Outside, a sleek black car waits for him. Its polished surface gleams under the sunlight, exuding quiet luxury and authority. With a sharp motion, the car door shuts, slam, echoing through the still air. The sound feels like punctuation, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The car's engine hums softly, ready to carry its owner toward whatever awaits next. Inside the car, the man leans back against the seat, exhaling slowly. The tension in his shoulders eases for a brief moment as his gaze drifts forward, thoughtful and distant. A quiet confession fills the space. I became a prosecutor for personal reasons. His voice, though calm, carries a weight of emotion and unspoken memories. As he breathes out, it feels as though he's trying to release not just air, but the burden that comes with his chosen path. As the evening light softly touched the fabric of her clothes, a quiet thought surfaced in her mind. She sighed inwardly, feeling the weight of another long week. But still, she mused, I at least wanted to have an evening for myself on the weekend. It wasn't too much to ask for a bit of solitude, a small slice of peace away from all the noise and obligations. The man leaned back in his seat, pressing his fingers lightly against his face, as if trying to ease the weariness gathering behind his eyes. I didn't think I'd end up with dinner plans 2 nights in a row, he thought, almost incredulous at how his schedule had once again slipped from his control. Even the weekends, it seemed, refused to offer him rest. His crisp white shirt, slightly creased from the long day, clung to him as he exhaled slowly. The motion of his hand, covering part of his face, betrayed his quiet exhaustion. In the stillness of the car, he could feel the tension of the week pressing down on him, his body and mind both yearning for a moment of calm that never seemed to come. The scene opens with a close-up of a man's face, his expression thoughtful and slightly tense. He's in the middle of adjusting his collar, perhaps trying to collect his thoughts. The atmosphere feels heavy, as if he's recalling something that happened not too long ago. His inner voice echoes quietly. Well, but yesterday. The sound of fabric shifting, whip, breaks the silence, emphasizing his hesitation. The narration continues as the setting changes. Warm sunlight filters through green leaves, casting gentle shadows across a peaceful outdoor terrace. His thoughts linger, completing the sentence from before. Was an interesting day, to say the least. The tone suggests both surprise and disbelief, hinting at an event that left a deep impression on him. In the midst of this tranquil backdrop, a voice from his memory resurfaces, a bold and unexpected proposal. Why don't you have an affair with me? The memory sharpens into a vivid image. A man and a woman stand facing each other in the sunlit garden. The woman, with flowing red hair and a confident yet serious expression, gestures slightly toward him as she speaks. Her attire, a white blouse beneath a long black dress, gives her an air of composed elegance. The man, tall and stoic in his dark suit, meets her gaze silently, his hands calmly tucked into his pockets. The moment between them is charged, suspended in the tension of her daring words and his stunned reaction. A soft golden light filters through the air, illuminating the ground beneath 2 people's feet. One pair of black shoes faces another, a moment of quiet tension hanging between them. The air feels fragile, shimmering with anticipation. A single word escapes into the stillness. Instead, hesitant yet full of unspoken meaning, as if everything depends on what comes next. The scene shifts. The warm glow of the sunset casts long shadows across a man's face. His expression is calm, thoughtful, perhaps even a little distant. His sharp eyes seem to carry both curiosity and a trace of melancholy as he utters a name that lingers heavily in the air. So Young-ji. It's not just a name, it's a memory, a connection, and maybe a wound that time hasn't quite healed. Darkness envelops the frame, bleeding in from all sides, leaving only a faint light at the center.
His thoughts echo in that void, heavy with realization and disbelief. I never imagined she'd be that kind of person when we first met. The memory of her, once bright and full of promise, now feels tainted, transformed by something he never saw coming. The past and present blur, leaving him questioning what he truly knew about So Young-ji at all. It all began at that party, the one my parents insisted I attend. They said it would be good for me, that I should meet someone named Na Young. I remember it clearly. It wasn't just any social gathering. It was the grand opening reception for a new art exhibit at the museum. The air was filled with soft chatter, the clinking of glasses, and the subtle scent of wine and perfume mingling with the sterile elegance of modern art. Among the crowd of well-dressed guests, I saw him, Mr. Han. He stood tall and composed, a glass of red wine in each hand, dressed impeccably in a dark suit. Beside him, a woman with a warm smile laughed softly, her tone light and familiar as she greeted him. "Good to see you, Mr. Han," she said, her voice carrying easily over the polite hum of conversation. The two of them looked like they belonged there, poised, confident, untouchable. Then the sound of a door clicking open broke through the murmur of the crowd. Clack! A new presence entered the room, drawing subtle glances. "Thank you so much for coming," a voice said kindly. It was the polite welcome of a host, yet beneath it lingered the anticipation of something or someone important arriving. In the elegant hall of the art museum, a sophisticated woman introduces herself with a graceful smile. Her poise and confidence command the room as she says, "I am Hye-jeong Kim, the art museum director here." The sparkle in her eyes reflects her pride and authority, perfectly fitting the refined atmosphere around her. She delicately raises a glass of red wine, the ruby liquid shimmering under the soft lights. Her hand rests elegantly against her chest as she continues, her tone calm yet meaningful. "I see you've already met my daughter Nayoung." The statement carries a subtle weight, suggesting that there's more to this introduction than mere politeness. Turning slightly, Director Kim gestures towards someone standing beside her. A young man in a dark suit stands straight, his expression composed, yet observant. "Oh, this is..." she begins, her words trailing off as if to emphasize the significance of the moment. The air feels charged with quiet anticipation. With a light motion, she sets her wine glass down on a passing tray. The soft tap of crystal meeting silver echoes faintly, signaling a shift in the conversation. Her refined gestures reveal her practiced grace, each movement deliberate and dignified. Finally, her gaze turns toward another woman nearby. "My eldest daughter, So Young," she announces with a faint smile. So Young steps forward, her long auburn hair tied back elegantly, her eyes calm yet distant. The light catches in her hair as she looks ahead, composed, beautiful, and carrying an air of quiet strength. In the soft glow of the banquet hall, a woman stood poised and elegant, holding a tray with a single glass of red wine. Her beige suit hugged her frame neatly, exuding quiet professionalism and confidence. Around her, murmurs of conversation and laughter blended with the faint clinking of glasses. Yet, despite the lively backdrop, her demeanor was calm, almost distant. She looked as though she belonged to the room, yet somehow stood apart from it, her thoughts elsewhere behind that composed smile. Across the room, a man in a dark suit observed her with quiet curiosity. His brows furrowed slightly as two questions formed in his mind. Daughter? Not a secretary. The realization unsettled him, as if a puzzle piece had just shifted into place, revealing a truth he hadn't expected. The bustle of people behind him blurred into insignificance. His focus was entirely on her, on the woman whose role and story were suddenly far more complicated than he had imagined. His mind drifted to the past. Back then, he thought, I just thought she was a really tough person. Even at that time, it had been impossible to miss the signs, the quiet endurance, the way she never flinched no matter how harshly she was treated. It was obvious what kind of treatment she got at home, he admitted to himself now. She had built her walls carefully, layer by layer, shielding herself from a world that had never been kind. He remembered her mannerisms vividly, the way she always seemed to follow orders without question, never showing defiance or complaint. She seemed to obediently go along with whatever she was told, he reflected, his fingers lightly brushing his lips in thought. There had been something deeply ingrained in her, a kind of submission that came not from weakness, but from long years of conditioning. And yet, there had been a spark, something buried beneath that obedience, something waiting to ignite. So why try to start a rebellion for such a trivial reason? The question echoed in his mind. What had driven her to suddenly push back, to challenge everything she had always complied with? The memory came to him with startling clarity, her voice sharp and unflinching as she looked him straight in the eye. I heard you're impotent, she had said. The words had landed like a slap, shocking in their boldness. In that moment, he realized the quiet woman he thought he knew had far more courage and far more anger than he had ever given her credit for. The late afternoon sun bathed the garden in warm, golden hues as the two stood facing each other. The young woman, her soft auburn hair cascading in gentle waves down her back, looked up at the man before her. He was dressed sharply in a dark suit, his expression calm yet unreadable, his eyes betraying a quiet curiosity. Despite the serene setting, there was a subtle tension in the air, something unspoken passing between them. Still, she's surprisingly bold sometimes, which amuses me. The thought echoed in his mind as he watched her, a faint hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He found her unpredictable nature intriguing, the way she could stand her ground despite his intimidating presence. It was a quality he didn't expect, and perhaps that was why it drew him in all the more. Sitting in his car later, the man leaned back with a faint smirk, curving his lips. His thoughts lingered on her, her expressions, her words, the moments that caught him off guard. The more I think about it, the more curious I get, he mused. The sunlight filtering through the window cast a warm glow over his features, making his eyes gleam with both amusement and interest. A soft rustle broke the silence as he shifted in his seat, reaching into his pocket. Pulling out his sleek black phone, he began to type, his fingers moving deliberately over the screen. There was a glint of playfulness in his eyes, an almost mischievous anticipation as his thoughts translated into words. Tap. His thumb hovered for a moment before pressing the small paper plane icon on the screen, the familiar symbol of a message sent. A subtle sense of satisfaction crossed his face. Whatever he had written, it carried the weight of his growing curiosity, and perhaps a hint of something more. The phone slipped from his hand with a soft swoosh, landing on the seat beside him with a muted thud. The brief sound broke the stillness inside the car, echoing faintly before fading away. He exhaled slowly, his expression thoughtful, as if weighing his next move. A small, decisive smile curved his lips. Well then, he murmured to himself, voice low but confident, I guess I should head over first. His tone carried a hint of amusement, a quiet anticipation for what was to come, and perhaps for the person waiting on the other end. Elsewhere, the quiet of a tidy desk was interrupted by the faint vibration of a phone. Buzz, buzz. Amidst stacks of papers and open books, the screen lit up with a new message.
The owner of the desk glanced toward it, momentarily distracted from the dense text before them. On the glowing screen, a short message appeared, simple yet loaded with implication. Hotel Pellier, room 3812. The words lingered on the display, stark and unembellished, carrying with them a mix of mystery and invitation. Whoever sent it knew exactly what they were doing. A thought flickered through his mind, uncertain, but not entirely without hope. Not sure if she'll show up, though. The words carried a quiet vulnerability, hidden beneath layers of composure. Despite his confidence, there remained a sliver of doubt, a question left unanswered, suspended in the silence of anticipation.
The scene shifts to a quiet workspace where a smartphone lies flat on a desk next to a spiral notebook filled with dense text. The silence is suddenly shattered by a physical vibration, buzz, as the device rattles against the table. The glow of the screen at 5:20 indicates an interruption at a time meant for focus or rest, signaling that the outside world is refusing to let her character move on. Despite her efforts to ignore the contact, the notifications do not stop. A close-up of a system alert reveals a text message from a hidden or unsaved number, 010XXXXXXXXXXXXX. The simple, cold notification, "You have a message," hangs in the void, suggesting that her former partner may be attempting to bypass her boundaries by using a different identity or number. A woman with long, wavy, reddish-brown hair stares down at her phone with a sharp, visible glare. Her expression is one of deep annoyance and weariness as she sees a familiar name appearing on her screen yet again. The thought bubble above her head confirms her frustration with a single exhausted realization. Dong-sung again. The final scene focuses on the woman clutching her phone tightly against her chest, her body language tense and defensive. She is dressed in a simple tan wrap top, but her mind is far from calm. Looking down at the device that has become a source of constant stress, she can only think of one thing regarding his behavior. He's so relentless. The cycle of harassment continues, proving that a breakup was not enough to stop his pursuit. The story begins with a heavy realization shrouded in darkness. The character reflects on a decisive moment that should have been an end, but instead became a haunting memory. Last night, I broke up with Dong-sung right away. The jagged, static-filled background mirrors the internal turmoil and the sharp, painful nature of the separation. The story begins with a moment of quiet introspection. A man with sharp, refined features stands against the backdrop of a fading twilight sky. His expression is unreadable, bordering on cold. Above him, a narration box reveals the internal struggle of the protagonist. I thought I saw a glimmer of hope in Yeon-yuk. This suggests a past desire for connection or a solution that ultimately failed to materialize. He asks dismissively, "Is that all you have to say?" setting a tense tone for the encounter. The perspective shifts to a close-up of the man's attire, a sophisticated, textured gray suit. His hand is thrust casually into his pocket, signaling a lack of emotional investment, or perhaps a desire to maintain a stoic facade. He concludes the conversation with a cold finality, stating, "Then let's end things here for today." His body language suggests he is already mentally checking out of the situation. Text panels against a dark background provide a deeper look into the protagonist's motives. The internal monologue explains that a long-held strategy has reached a dead end. In the end, I never got a clear answer. Because the primary goal, a plan for revenge, has fizzled out, the protagonist realizes there is no longer any strategic or personal benefit in maintaining their current relationship. The decision is made. There is no reason to delay the inevitable breakup any longer. The scene shifts to a sidewalk where two figures stand close together.
We see the lower half of a man in tan trousers and the legs of a woman wearing elegant black high-heeled pumps with ankle straps. The tension is palpable in the small space between them. A speech bubble breaks the silence with a life-altering declaration. Dong-song, let's call off the engagement. The formal use of his name combined with the heavy request marks the official end of their shared future. In the final scene, the woman, So-young, turns her back on Dong-song, her long auburn hair flowing as she walks away. Her eyes are closed, showing a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. Dong-song is left standing behind her, visibly shaken and breaking into a sweat. He reaches out a hand as if to stop her, stammering, "Wait, So-young," but her mind is made up. Over her shoulder, her final words are polite but distant. "I wish you all the best." As So-young attempts to walk away, the silence of the evening is shattered by a sudden, forceful movement. A hand reaches out with urgency, firmly grabbing her wrist to halt her departure. The motion is captured in a blur, emphasizing the man's desperation to keep her from leaving the conversation and his life. Shocked by the suddenness of her decision, the man peers down at her with a look of frantic confusion. His face is pale, and a bead of sweat rolls down his temple as he struggles to process her words. He stammers out a question, his voice trembling with disbelief. Why so out of the blue, So-young?" He searches her face for any sign that this is just a misunderstanding, but the sunset glow only highlights the growing distance between them. Despite his physical hold on her, So-young does not waver. She stands tall, her long auburn hair cascading over her shoulders, but her expression remains cold and detached. She looks back at him over her shoulder with an icy glare that suggests her mind is firmly made up. The physical grab that once might have felt like protection now feels like an unwelcome tether as she prepares to sever their final tie. Trying to find a logical excuse for her sudden coldness, the man forces a nervous, shaky smile. He tries to rationalize her behavior by blaming external pressures rather than their relationship. He asks tentatively, "Has work been a lot lately? Are you worn out?" It is a desperate attempt to frame her desire for a breakup as a temporary symptom of exhaustion rather than a permanent choice. In a final, frantic bid to salvage their engagement, he resorts to promises of change and future happiness. His voice drops as he offers a rare moment of self-reflection, admitting, "I haven't been taking good care of you, have I?" Without waiting for an answer, he quickly follows up with a bribe of time and affection. "Once things settle down, let's go on a trip, okay?" It is a classic too little too late gesture offered to a woman who has already mentally left his side. The scene opens with a tense close-up of So-young. Her expression is solemn, her brows slightly furrowed with a mix of sadness and absolute resolve. She looks directly at the man before her and speaks with a heavy heart. "Dong-song, I'm not saying this lightly. I really mean it." The weight of her words hangs in the air, signaling that what she is about to say is not a temporary emotional outburst, but a final decision. The tension reaches its peak as So-young delivers the crushing blow. "Let's break up." As she speaks, there is a sharp physical disconnection. The image shows a snatch effect as her hand pulls away from his, breaking the physical bond they once shared. The red text of her dialogue emphasizes the finality and the pain of the severance. Dong-song is left standing in the fading glow of the sunset, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. He looks completely blank, unable to process the sudden end of their relationship. So-young doesn't linger to watch his reaction. She simply offers a cold, final goodbye as she begins to turn her back on him and their shared past. Without another word, So-young walks past him. The camera focuses on the physical distance growing between them. Dong-song reaches out a hand instinctively, as if to grab the air she just occupied, but he remains frozen in place. The blurred background and the focus on So-young's retreating figure highlight the emotional wall she has built between them. The scene shifts to the aftermath, late into the night. Against a dark, starry background, the silence is broken by the persistent ding of phone notifications. It is 9:10 p.m., and Dong-song is desperately trying to reach her. His messages read, "So-young, pick up," followed by a heartbreaking plea. "So-young, we can't break up like this." He is struggling to accept the reality that she has already moved on. The silence of the night is shattered by the constant buzzing of So-young's phone. Despite her clear rejection, Dong-song refuses to let go, sending desperate messages like, "I'm sorry, So-young, I'll be better." When he realizes he has been blocked or ignored, he begins a relentless cycle of changing his phone number over and over again just to force his way back into her digital life. The harassment escalates as a new notification appears from an unknown number. Even though it is flagged as a blocked message, the content is visible and reveals a darker turn in Dong-song's behavior. After 10 missed attempts from various numbers, he sends a sharp, accusatory text. "So-young, are you seeing someone else?" His desperation has shifted from apologies to unfounded jealousy and suspicion. In the privacy of her home, So-young is visibly drained by the ongoing ordeal. She lets out a heavy sigh, leaning her head against her hand as she processed the audacity of his latest message. Looking at the phone with a mixture of fatigue and contempt, she thinks to herself, "That's rich coming from you." It is clear that his accusations of infidelity are hypocritical, likely reflecting his own past actions rather than her reality. So-young decides that enough is enough. Instead of engaging with the toxic cycle or defending herself against his out-of-line accusations, she puts her phone face down on the table. This physical act symbolizes her attempt to shut out the noise and reclaim her peace. She is choosing to walk away from the digital ghost of her ex-boyfriend, refusing to give his insecurity any more of her energy. The narrative concludes with So-young's internal reflection on the situation. She characterizes the entire experience as a string of pathetic texts. For her, the relationship didn't just end with a conversation, it died through his inability to respect her boundaries. By sending messages that were out of line, Dong-song only succeeded in turning her lingering sadness into complete and utter loss of respect. As she places her hand firmly on the device with a soft pat, she muses with frustration. You'd think he'd give up by now. She is baffled by his inability to recognize that his constant intrusion is only driving her further away. Despite her efforts to ignore him, the phone begins to vibrate violently on the table with a loud buzz. An incoming call from another unassigned number, the same 010 prefix, lights up the screen. Her finger hovers near the decline button as the digital harassment transforms into a physical intrusion of her quiet evening. The camera zooms in on So-young's face, catching the moment she comes to a halt as she sees the screen. Her expression is one of pure exasperation. It's that number again, she thinks, her patience completely evaporated. She is truly sick and tired of this never-ending cycle of digital stalking. The intensity of the situation is represented by a frantic series of buzz sound effects scattered across a distorted, static-filled background. This visualizes the overwhelming noise and pressure Dong-song is creating, turning her phone from a tool of communication into a source of constant anxiety. The scene concludes with a firm internal declaration amidst the persistent buzzing of the phone. Surrounded by the dark, heavy atmosphere of the night, So-young's resolve remains unbroken. Her final thought is a clear, cold boundary. I told you, I have nothing more to say to you. The scene begins with a surge of intense emotion. The woman, her face contorted with anger and a visible anger symbol on her temple, yells into her smartphone. She is at her breaking point, her voice sharp as she shouts, "I don't want to see you." The background is filled with dramatic speed lines, emphasizing the volume and force of her rejection. Continuing her heated tirade, she becomes even more direct. She demands to know why the person on the other end is being so clingy despite her previous refusals. With cold, unwavering honesty, she makes it clear that her distance isn't due to a busy schedule or external circumstances. It is personal. She bluntly states, "I just don't like you," while a close-up shows a hand clenched into a tight fist, signifying her inner tension and resolve. The camera pulls back to a high-angle shot, showing her small figure seated at a desk in a large, lonely room. Above her, a massive, jagged speech bubble dominates the frame like a physical weight. The text screams in bold, red-tinted letters, "Don't ever contact me again." This is the final bridge being burned, leaving no room for negotiation or apology. Following the explosion of words, a sudden, suffocating silence fills the air. The woman remains holding the phone to her ear, but her expression has shifted from outward rage to a mix of anxiety and expectation. The shout sound effect has been replaced by a chilling silent. She waits, her eyes narrowed, as the speech bubble from the other end remains empty, containing only an ellipsis. The focus shifts to a tight close-up of her lower half of her face and the phone. The aggressive energy of the previous moments has evaporated, leaving behind a lingering unease. Beads of sweat begin to form on her skin. Despite having just told him to never call again, she finds herself unsettled by the lack of a response, thinking to herself with growing concern, why isn't he saying anything? The scene opens with a close-up of a hand firmly gripping a smartphone. A thumb hovers near the screen, having just performed an action. In the background of her thoughts, the woman muses with a sense of finality. Well, I'm sure he got the message by now. The screen displays an active call interface with options for speaker and mute, but the prominent red End Call button suggests a conversation that was either cut short or intentionally ignored. However, the silence she expected is immediately shattered. A sharp, jagged speech bubble, indicating a loud or aggressive voice from the other end of the line, cuts through the air. "I didn't expect to hear an earful from just one call," the narration suggests, as the camera zooms in on the woman's eye. Her expression is one of sudden alertness, her gaze narrowing as she begins to process the hostile or overwhelming reaction coming through the receiver. The tension escalates in a silent beat. A single exclamation hangs in a small bubble, perfectly capturing her stunned realization. Her eyes widen slightly, reflecting the light of the room and the burgeoning shock of the situation. Whatever the person on the other side is saying, it is far more intense than she had anticipated. As the voice on the phone continues to berate her, the woman sits at her desk, visibly taken aback. The jagged speech bubbles loom over her, delivering a stinging rebuke. "Aren't you the one who wanted to meet? I wasn't expecting this reaction." She holds the phone slightly away from her ear, her face pale and a bead of sweat trickling down her cheek, signaling her growing discomfort and the feeling of being backed into a corner by the caller's verbal onslaught. The scene concludes with the woman leaning forward, her body language shifting from passive shock to an urgent need to de-escalate. Her hand reaches out as if to physically stop the flow of words, and she finally finds an opening to speak. Her brows are furrowed in worry as she stammers into the phone. Wait a second," desperately trying to reclaim control of a conversation that has spiraled completely out of her hands. The woman's confusion begins to crystallize into recognition as she tentatively speaks a name into the receiver. "Mr. Ionhek?" On the other end of the line, a man with sharp features and a composed demeanor sits in the back of a car. His expression is unreadable, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips as he listens to her voice, confirming her suspicion of who is on the other side. With a chillingly calm tone, he responds simply, "Speaking." He doesn't let her recover from the surprise, immediately pressing his advantage by pointing out her obvious distraction. "You seem like you're waiting for someone else's call. Should I hang up?" he asks, his words laced with a subtle challenge that makes her grip the phone even tighter. Caught completely off guard, the woman's thoughts begin to race in a frantic loop. A small, flustered chibi version of her appears, representing her internal panic as she stammers, No, wait, why did you call me?" Internally, she is screaming with bewilderment, wondering what is going on and why this man is suddenly reaching out to her out of the blue. The conversation takes a sharp, jagged turn into much darker territory. A notification ping sounds as a harsh, pointed speech bubble delivers a verbal blow that leaves her speechless. "You wanted to have an affair, but then went and became single?" The woman is frozen, her face drained of color and a bead of sweat forming as she can only manage a stunned, "Pardon?" The man's voice remains steady, almost intimate, as he repeats the scandalous claim to ensure it sinks in. A close-up of his lower face shows a confident, knowing smirk as he utters the words, "You said you wanted to have an affair." The weight of his words hangs heavy in the air, turning her world upside down in a single phone call. The tension begins with a cryptic message. A simple text bubble floats in the void of her mind, carrying a weight she doesn't yet fully grasp. The words are cold and direct. "If you're still interested, meet me at the place I texted earlier." It is an invitation to a confrontation, a prompt that sets the wheels of doubt in motion. Next, we see the protagonist, a woman with flowing reddish-brown hair tied back, her profile etched with a growing sense of unease. She holds her phone tightly to her ear, her expression taut as she listens to the voice on the other end. She is trying to maintain her composure, but the subtle furrow of her brow betrays the internal conflict brewing within her. The conversation is cut short. A jagged hexagonal speech bubble indicates a cold, dismissive tone from the caller. "I'll be hanging up now." Stunned by the suddenness of it, she can only stammer back, "Wait, why all of a sudden?" The line goes dead, leaving her questions hanging in the heavy air of the room. The shock of the hang-up forces her to look at her screen. She stares down at her phone, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. The realization hits her like a physical blow. Her mouth hangs open slightly, and a bead of cold sweat trickles down her face. She is no longer just confused, she is shaken to her core. Finally, the internal monologue shatters her previous assumptions. The jagged edges of her thoughts mirror her fractured sense of reality. Wait, so that text wasn't from Dong-song, it was from him. The realization that she has been misled, or perhaps walked right into a trap set by someone else entirely, leaves her standing in a state of absolute paralysis. The pieces of the puzzle have finally clicked into place, but the picture they form is far more dangerous than she ever imagined. The silence that follows the conversation is deafening. On the glowing screen of her smartphone, the cold reality is displayed in stark white text. Call ended. The duration of the call, just under 2 minutes, felt like an eternity, leaving behind only the rhythmic, mocking beep, beep of the disconnected line. As she stares at the darkened screen, her internal monologue begins to spiral. Jagged, anxious thought bubbles fill her mind as she tries to make sense of the sudden shift. She had firmly believed their interaction was a closed chapter, a bridge burned in the past. "I thought our conversation was over that day," she thinks, followed by the haunting question that refuses to leave. Why did he change his mind?
The scene shifts to her inner psyche, where the world fades into a hazy, textured white. Her thoughts are no longer just questions, they are a desperate evaluation of her future. More than anything, the words drift across her consciousness. Is this an opportunity for me? She is tempted by the possibility of gain, wondering if this unexpected turn of events is the lucky break she has been waiting for. We see her from behind, a lone figure sitting in the shadows of a dim office. She sits at a desk cluttered with the remnants of her day, a monitor, a landline phone, and stacks of notebooks, but her focus is entirely on the small, glowing device in her hand. With a soft pat, she sets the phone down on the desk, the gesture heavy with the gravity of the decision she must now make. The dark, hatched lines of the floor beneath her chair suggest a growing sense of dread or a sinking feeling she cannot escape. The final image is a chilling metaphor for her situation. Against a pitch-black background, the words, "Or is it?" hang precariously over a massive, jagged bear trap. The sharp, metallic teeth of the trap are wide open, waiting for a single misstep. The glowing purple text asks the ultimate question: a trap? She is standing at a crossroads where the line between a golden opportunity and a fatal mistake has become dangerously thin. The tension in the room is palpable as a hand reaches out with clinical precision, firmly gripping a sleek, modern smartphone resting on a white surface. The sharp sound effect, "fwip," cuts through the silence, signaling a sudden, decisive movement. A thought bubble emerges, reflecting the character's urgent state of mind. There's no time to lose. Every second counts, and the internal clock is ticking toward a critical turning point. Standing tall with her back to the viewer, the woman exudes a sense of quiet strength and calculation. Her long, wavy auburn hair cascades down her back, and she is dressed in a simple, olive-toned, long-sleeved shirt. She peers into the distance, her resolve hardening. Her internal monologue reveals her pragmatic nature. If it's an opportunity, I'll take it. She is a person who refuses to let a single chance slip through her fingers, no matter how small. The scene shifts into a psychological landscape, dark and foreboding. A small, innocent white rabbit stands in the center of a spotlight, looking vulnerable against a deep purple textured background. Above it, a jagged, shadowy silhouette looms like a closing jaw or a snare. The character acknowledges the danger inherent in her next move, thinking, "And if it's a trap?" This visual metaphor highlights the high stakes and the potential for a deadly ambush. Suddenly, the darkness is shattered by a violent, jagged white flash. The word "snap" appears in bold, stylized purple lettering, vibrating with the force of a trap being sprung. It is a moment of impact, the sound of a closing cage or a breaking point. The visual language suggests that the danger she anticipated has arrived, or perhaps she has finally committed to a path from which there is no turning back. Despite the looming threat, the woman remains unfazed. The final panel shows a close-up of her face. Her expression is calm, her eyes sharp and focused. A faint rustle sound suggests she is moving into action. Her final thought completes her previous sentiment with a chillingly confident vow. If it's a trap, I'll turn it into an opportunity. She isn't just surviving the trap, she is planning to dismantle it and use the chaos to her own advantage. The woman stands in a moment of quiet contemplation, her long reddish-brown hair catching the light as she absent-mindedly twirls a strand around her fingers. Her gaze is lowered, marked by a somber and focused expression that suggests she is deeply immersed in her own strategy. Dressed in an elegant, olive-toned wrap top with delicate lace detailing at the neckline, she radiates a sophisticated but guarded aura. The scene shifts to a luxurious high-rise apartment overlooking a sprawling city at night, where the glittering lights stretch toward the horizon like a sea of stars. Inside, the atmosphere is heavy and still, with a lone armchair positioned near a large floor-to-ceiling window.
On a sleek white coffee table sits a half-empty bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, suggesting a meeting or a moment of reflection that has already begun or is waiting to happen. A handsome man with dark, neatly styled hair sits in the dim light, his presence commanding yet troubled. Wearing a crisp, light-colored button-down shirt, he stares blankly ahead with a cold, distant look in his eyes. With a steady hand, he tilts a bottle to pour amber liquid into a glass filled with a large ice cube, the sound effect, pow, punctuating the heavy silence of the room. The camera zooms in on the man's hands as the whiskey splashes against the ice, filling the glass. His posture remains stiff and formal, even in this private moment of drinking. A thought bubble appears near the bottom of the frame, revealing the turmoil beneath his composed exterior. How did it come to this? It is clear that he is grappling with a situation that has spiraled out of his control. The sequence concludes with a sharp, tactile sound, clank, as the bottle of Juk Ojig whiskey is set firmly back down on the hard surface of the table. A hand still grips the dark label of the bottle, showing the physical manifestation of his internal frustration. The heavy glass meeting the table signals a definitive end to his questioning, as he prepares to face whatever confrontation or decision lies ahead.
The narrative transitions into a space of pure internal conflict. Against a stark gradient background of white fading into deep black, a jagged-edged thought bubble takes center stage. It contains a single regretful admission: I never planned for things to go this way. This sentiment bridges the gap between the private drinking scene and the professional fallout that follows. The setting shifts abruptly to a high-stakes office environment. An older man, appearing agitated and authoritative, sits behind a desk piled high with documents. He holds a stack of papers that flutter in his hand as he leans forward, his face etched with a scowl. He barks a pointed question at his subordinate. "Prosecutor Han, do you think I gave you such a big case just for fun?" Prosecutor Han, the man previously seen drinking in solitude, now stands in the office, his expression unreadable and stoic. He is dressed in a formal dark suit and tie, embodying his professional role. Above him, a large speech bubble emphasizes the gravity of the situation. We're not talking about any politician here. He's being talked about as a presidential candidate. The stakes of the investigation have clearly escalated to the highest levels of power. The superior continues his verbal assault, his words filling the frame as he demands results. The speech bubbles press against the image of Han's suited torso, symbolizing the immense pressure being placed upon him. The superior's voice is cold and demanding. If you went around claiming that Chairman G is involved in this case, then you should have something to show for it by now, right? The sequence ends with a tight close-up on Prosecutor Han's face. His eyes are narrow and his mouth is set in a thin line of defiance or perhaps suppressed exhaustion. The superior's final biting question looms over him. How long do you expect me to keep turning a blind eye for you? The moment hangs in the air, leaving Han caught between his duty, his investigations, and the political machinery threatening to crush him. The scene opens with a focus on a man dressed in a sharp, formal black suit with a crisp white shirt and a dark blue tie. The image centers on his torso, symbolizing the cold, professional atmosphere of his environment. A thought bubble reveals a biting internal monologue. He is observing someone he considers utterly incompetent at his job, yet dangerously laser-focused on climbing the corporate ladder. It sets a tone of workplace rivalry and hidden disdain. The perspective shifts to a dramatic close-up of a man's face, his intense dark eyes narrowed in deep thought. The shadow falling across his features emphasizes the gravity of his mission. He is mentally calculating his next move, realizing that traditional methods won't work. To break the case, he concludes that he simply needs to uncover a hidden trail, specifically an account registered under a false name. Continuing the close-up from the previous moment, the man's gaze remains fixed and unwavering. The lower half of the frame fades into a deep abyssal black, mirroring the murky world of financial crimes he is navigating. His internal dialogue concludes his thought process. If not a false name, he is searching for a padded account, a secret stash of wealth that could be the smoking gun he needs. The atmosphere grows darker and more ominous. The imagery shifts to a somber, purple-hued backdrop where an older, stern-looking couple stands. The man is broad-shouldered and expressionless, while the woman wears a cold, knowing smirk. Overhead, the investigator's frustration peaks as he wonders, how did they manage to keep everyone this airtight? It is clear he is up against a powerful, disciplined front that refuses to leak any information. Finally, we see the investigator in a moment of solitary reflection. He is shown from the neck down, tilting a glass of amber liquid to his lips, a gulp sound effect,
highlighting the moment. The tension is palpable as he reveals the personal cost of this investigation. He isn't just doing a job, he has thrown his entire life into this case, sacrificing everything else for the sake of uncovering the truth. The story takes a painful turn as the protagonist uncovers a double layer of deception. He realizes that Na Young, someone he likely trusted or sought information from, is not only useless to his investigation because she knows nothing, but has also committed the ultimate personal betrayal. The weight of the words reveals a stinging irony. She has ended up cheating on him with his own high school classmate, adding a layer of deep-seated humiliation to his professional struggles. The narrative flashes to a scene of heart-wrenching intimacy between the two betrayers. A muscular, light-haired man, the classmate, lounges comfortably in bed, resting his head on his hand with a smug, satisfied expression. Lying beside him is a woman with dark hair, laughing and looking up at him with genuine affection. This visual confirmation of their affair serves as the catalyst for the protagonist's growing coldness and resolve. Back in the present, the protagonist's face is partially shown, a subtle yet dangerous smirk playing on his lips as he processes the insult. His internal monologue reflects on the pathetic outcome of his recent efforts. After all the energy he spent, all he got out of it was being called impotent by those who betrayed him. Rather than breaking him, this insult seems to be fueling a new, darker fire within him. The protagonist is shown in full view, dressed in a crisp white shirt that fits him perfectly, looking every bit the sophisticated gentleman. He holds a glass of whiskey with a large ice sphere, the light reflecting off the liquid and his sharp features. He wears a handsome but hollow smile, the kind that masks a predator's intent. He has moved past the initial shock of betrayal and is now assuming a persona of calmed, collected power. The sequence concludes with a close-up of his hand swirling the ice in his glass, the clink of the ice against the crystal punctuating his final thought. He has reached a cold, logical conclusion regarding his path forward. Since Na Young was a dead end both emotionally and strategically, he decides to pivot his focus entirely. His final thought is chillingly dismissive. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be Na Young. The search for a new pawn or a new target has officially begun. The focus shifts to a new strategic partnership with someone named Soyoung. The protagonist begins to treat his relationships as purely transactional. He resolves to give Soyoung exactly what she wants from him, with a clear, cold intention of getting exactly what he needs from her in return.
It is a negotiation born of necessity rather than trust. Standing against the backdrop of a glittering city at night, the protagonist reaches a point of finality. He looks out over the urban landscape, his resolve hardening like the ice in his glass. He tells himself, "That's enough," signaling the end of his period of suffering and the beginning of his active retaliation. The narrative introduces a visual of the woman Soyoung, who seems to be a central figure in his new plan. She has long, flowing reddish-brown hair and is elegantly dressed with a large jewel at her collar. Despite her beauty, she appears vulnerable. The protagonist notes that she has big eyes that seemed full of fear, suggesting she might be easy to manipulate or is already caught in a difficult situation. The tension builds as the protagonist waits for his new contact to make her move. An image shows a woman's hand, likely Soyoung's, delicately holding a cigarette. The question hangs heavy in the air. Will she come? It is a moment of anticipation where the success of his new plan depends on her arrival. The sequence ends with a focus on the protagonist sitting in a plush chair, his posture relaxed but ready. He is shown from the waist down, his white shirt contrasting with the dark trousers and the purple-hued city lights in the background. He is the predator in wait, calm and certain that the pieces of his new game are finally falling into place. The silence is suddenly broken by the sharp, ringing sound of a doorbell. Ding dong! A close-up of the protagonist's lower face shows him mid-sip from a glass of whiskey, the sound signaling that his wait is finally over. The guest he anticipated has arrived right on schedule. As he prepares to greet her, a small, knowing smile spreads across his face. He finds her presence and her predictable arrival fascinating. He thinks to himself, "What an interesting woman indeed," acknowledging that she has become a piece on his chessboard that he intends to study and use to his advantage. Standing tall and looking every bit the sophisticated elite, the protagonist holds his drink with practiced ease. The city lights shimmer behind him, reflecting the high society world he navigates with such calculated precision. He is no longer the man being mocked. He is the man in control. As he rises to meet her, he wonders about the facade she will present this time. His thoughts are clinical and detached. I wonder what kind of face she'll put on today. He knows that in their world, everyone wears a mask, and he is eager to see which one she has chosen for their negotiation. The sequence ends with the heavy, purposeful sound of his footsteps, clump. As he walks toward the door, the frame focuses on his dark trousers and the sleek door of the modern apartment. The stage is set, the players are present, and the game of mutual manipulation is about to begin in earnest. The silence of the room is suddenly punctured by a sharp, rhythmic creak as a heavy door swings open. Emerging from the shadows is a woman whose presence immediately commands attention. Only a glimpse of her is visible at first. Her long, wavy auburn hair cascades over her shoulders like silk, and she is dressed in an elegant, off-the-shoulder cream outfit. The deliberate movement suggests someone who is not just entering a room, but making an entrance. Across the room, the man is caught completely off guard. He stands frozen in profile, his sharp jawline tensed as he processes the sight of the woman he likely didn't expect to see. His dark, neatly styled hair and crisp white shirt give him an air of professional authority, but his wide-eyed gaze betrays his internal shock. The world seems to slow down for him as the reality of her return begins to sink in. As she steps fully into the light, her face is revealed, marked by a look of calculated composure. Her eyes, a striking shade of reddish hazel, fixate on her target with an intensity that is both beautiful and chilling. She wears a delicate gold earring that glimmers under the ambient light. With a faint, knowing smirk playing on her lips, she utters the words that break the tension.
"We meet again." The greeting is simple, yet it carries the weight of a complicated history. The man turns slightly toward her, his expression shifting from pure shock to a mixture of wariness and irritation. A small twitch near his eye reveals his growing agitation. While his face remains a mask of stoic, handsome features, his inner thoughts are racing. He watches her closely, thinking to himself with a sense of grim realization, she's really going all in now. He recognizes that this isn't just a chance encounter, it's a calculated move in a much larger game.
The confrontation takes place in a setting of refined luxury. The room is decorated with sophisticated wallpaper and high-end furniture. A large, ornate, circular mirror hangs on the wall, flanked by stylish, modern light fixtures that cast a warm, golden glow across the space. Potted flowers and carefully arranged decor items sit atop wooden cabinets, creating an atmosphere of calm that stands in stark contrast to the heavy, emotional storm brewing between the two people standing within it. The scene begins in a dimly lit hallway outside a hotel room. A woman with long, wavy auburn hair stands before a tall, broad-shouldered man. Despite his imposing presence, she looks him directly in the eye and asks with a steady, quiet confidence, "May I come in?" The man's hand is already on the door handle, pausing as he considers her unexpected request to enter his private space. As he turns to fully face her, the man crosses his arms over his chest, his muscular frame leaning slightly against the doorframe. He looks down at her with a sharp, piercing gaze, silently evaluating her presence. The air between them is thick with tension as he watches her closely, his expression unreadable but intense. Without a word, the man turns his back and leads the way into the room. He moves with a deliberate, slow pace, his silhouette silhouetted against the soft interior lighting. He is keenly aware of her following him, his mind already racing with thoughts about her motivations for being there. The woman takes a decisive step forward, the sound of her heels echoing softly against the floor. As she follows him into the room, the man's inner monologue reveals his skepticism and intrigue. Inviting herself to a place like this? He finds it hard to believe she would take such a bold risk. Once inside, the woman's composure falters ever so slightly. She reaches up, her fingers nervously twisting a lock of her hair as she takes in the room. The glowing light from the suite creates a halo around her, highlighting her hesitation now that she has actually crossed the threshold into his domain. Seeing her slight display of nerves, the man's cold expression breaks. A faint, mocking smirk plays on his lips as he glances back at her. Her audacity has clearly piqued his interest, and he seems to find the situation and her bravery unexpectedly entertaining. The man's final thought confirms his impression of her. As he looks at her, the narrative bubble punctuates the moment with a sharp realization. She's got guts. He recognizes the courage it took for her to follow him, setting the stage for a high-stakes encounter where she is no longer just a visitor, but a challenge he is ready to accept. The scene opens with a close-up from behind the female protagonist. Her long, wavy auburn hair cascades down her back, shimmering slightly under the soft room light. She reaches up with a pale, slender hand to nervously tuck a strand of hair, a gesture that betrays her inner turmoil. Standing before an open doorway that leads into a dimly lit modern interior, she seems to be bracing herself for the encounter ahead. Inside, the male protagonist watches her arrival with a sharp, discerning eye. He has dark, neatly styled hair and striking features that exude an air of cool confidence.
A subtle, knowing smirk plays on his lips, not quite warm, but certainly intrigued. As he looks at her, a thought bubble appears, revealing his inner monologue. She's got guts. It is clear he was testing her, and she has met his challenge. The perspective shifts to a wider shot as the woman fully enters the room. The sound of her heels hitting the floor is punctuated by a bold step onomatopoeia, followed by the heavy click of the door closing behind her. She stands tall in her elegant beige cocktail dress and matching shrug, though her face remains obscured by shadow, highlighting her anonymity and the tension of the moment. Behind her, the man stands tall and composed, his hands casually in his pockets as he watches her every move. A tighter shot focuses on her figure as she walks further into the space. Her hands are clenched slightly at her sides, and the jagged, vibrating speech bubble reflects her racing heart and anxiety. She thinks to herself, "I ended up coming, but..." The sentence trails off, leaving her doubts hanging in the air. Despite her outward appearance of poise, she is clearly questioning her decision to show up at this private meeting. The final scene captures the two characters in a profile shot, illustrating the physical and emotional distance between them. She walks past him, her head slightly bowed and a faint blush of embarrassment or frustration creeping onto her cheeks. The man remains stationary, his gaze fixed on her as she passes. The atmosphere is thick with unspoken words and a heavy step echoing through the quiet, luxurious room, marking the beginning of a high-stakes confrontation. As she settles into the room, a suffocating silence hangs between them. She sits by a marble table overlooking the glittering city lights through a massive floor-to-ceiling window. A bottle and a single glass rest on the table, reflecting the cold, high-end atmosphere. She stares away, her expression guarded and filled with unspoken thoughts, while the man stands just behind her, his presence looming and inescapable. The proximity to him is overwhelming. A jagged, frantic internal monologue bubble appears near her, betraying the calm facade she tries so hard to maintain. Inside, her mind is a whirlwind of anxiety as she admits to herself, "I'm so nervous, I don't know what to say." Every second that passes feels like an eternity in the shadow of his silent observation. Mustering her courage, she finally looks up and breaks the quiet with a hesitant question. Were you having a drink?" Her hand is raised slightly in a defensive, nervous gesture as she waits for his reaction. Above them, the word stare emphasizes his intense, unblinking gaze as he looks down at her. He remains silent for a moment, letting the weight of his stare linger before he finally offers a short, cryptic ... in response. Just as the tension reaches its peak, the camera zooms in on the lower half of the man's face. A faint, enigmatic smile begins to form on his lips. It isn't a smile of comfort. Rather, it's the satisfied look of someone who has their opponent exactly where they want them. This subtle shift in his expression suggests that he is enjoying the effect he has on her. Suddenly, he moves. With a decisive lean, he brings his face close to hers, invading her personal space and forcing her to look at him. She freezes, her eyes widening in surprise as she feels the heat of his presence. With a low, confident voice, he finally answers her earlier question with a single sharp word. Yes. The power dynamic is now unmistakable, leaving her completely at his mercy in the quiet room. The atmosphere shifts instantly as a startled young woman freezes in place, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and realization. She feels the sudden, towering presence of someone standing directly behind her. Her hand instinctively rises toward her chest, a silent "ah" escaping her thoughts as she senses the air grow heavy with the arrival of a man whose presence is as commanding as it is unexpected. Compelled by curiosity and a touch of apprehension, she sharply turns her head to face the newcomer. The word turn echoes the swiftness of her movement. As she looks up, she is met with the intense, unwavering gaze of a handsome man. The proximity between them is electric. Her breath hitches as she finds herself trapped in a moment of intimate silence, searching his expression for a hint of his intentions. Without breaking the tension, the man reaches out toward a nearby table. His hand, steady and refined, slides a heavy, square bottle of G-Show whiskey across the surface. The amber liquid catches the light, glowing with a warm, crystalline brilliance against the dark, ornate label. The smooth sound of the bottle gliding over the table underscores the deliberate nature of his actions. With a faint, enigmatic smile playing on his lips, the man looks down at her. He carries an air of effortless confidence, his dark hair perfectly styled, and his expression softened by a charm that feels both welcoming and dangerous. Above him, a speech bubble appears with a simple yet loaded question. Would you like a drink? It isn't just an offer of alcohol, it is an invitation to stay, a challenge to her composure. The scene settles on the man's striking figure as he stands tall, still clutching the whiskey bottle. His white dress shirt is crisp, slightly unbuttoned at the collar, suggesting a relaxed elegance. He exudes the aura of someone used to getting what he wants, his eyes sparkling with a hint of playfulness as he waits for her answer. The glimmering sparkle effects in the air highlight the cinematic, almost dreamlike quality of this late-night encounter. The young woman stands in a heavy silence, her heart racing as she processes the man's unexpected invitation. A single bead of sweat rolls down her temple, and she lets out a nervous gulp that feels incredibly loud in the quiet room. Her gaze is lowered, hidden in shadow, as her mind frantically races through the possibilities. She wonders to herself, is this an opportunity? Weighing the risks of this encounter against a potential chance she has been waiting for. The decision is made with a trembling but determined hand. She reaches toward the table, her fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of a clear glass. The light glints off the rim of the empty vessel as she lifts it, signaling her silent acceptance of his offer. Every movement is deliberate, a physical manifestation of her stepping into the unknown. Looking him directly in the eye, she finally finds her voice. Yes, she replies, her word clear and unwavering. The man reacts with a swift, graceful motion, fwhip, as he adjusts his stance, his eyes never leaving hers. He stands tall and composed, holding the dark bottle of whiskey ready to pour, while she holds the glass out toward him, bridging the gap between them in a moment of shared understanding. Up close, the man's eyes are sharp and calculating, framed by the dark fringe of his hair. He watches her every move with an intense, predatory focus, as if he can see through her hesitation to her true motives. There is a hidden depth in his blue-gray iris, suggesting that he is just as aware of the opportunity at hand as she is, playing a high-stakes game where every glance carries a secret meaning. Finally, the neck of the bottle tilts over the rim of the glass. A stream of rich, golden whiskey begins to trickle downward, splashing softly into the bottom of the vessel. The liquid glows under the ambient light, shimmering with a brilliance that masks the tension in the room. As the glass fills, the sound of the pour marks the official beginning of their interaction, a pact sealed in spirits and unspoken intentions. The scene opens with a close-up of a glass being filled with a rich, amber-colored liquid. The sound of the pour, a sharp trickle, echoes in the quiet room. A hand reaches out, perhaps to stop the pour or to take the glass, as a voice breaks the silence with a firm, cautionary command. That's enough. The tension is immediate, suggesting that whatever is being served carries a potent kick. We see the two characters clearly now. A man with dark, neatly styled hair and an intense gaze watches the woman closely. A thought bubble above him simply reads, as if he is gauging her reaction or anticipating what happens next. Despite the earlier warning, the woman, with flowing reddish-brown hair, takes a brave, continuous drink. The bold gulp sound effects emphasize her determination to handle the strong spirit, even as a small bead of sweat on her temple betrays her nervousness. The reality of the drink hits instantly. As the woman's head tilts back, the harshness of the alcohol overwhelms her. The man's voice returns, noted in a speech bubble at the top. It might be too strong for you. His timing is perfect, as a violent cuff erupts from her, followed by a strained, pained gasp. Ah! The shimmering lights of the city skyline in the background contrast with the sudden, messy physical reaction. The camera zooms in on the woman's face as she reels from the burn. Her eyes are squeezed shut in discomfort, and she reflexively claps her hand over her mouth to stifle more coughing. She is visibly flushed, her cheeks turning a soft pink from both the heat of the alcohol and the embarrassment of the moment. She still clutches the glass in her other hand, a shimmering reminder of the too strong drink that caught her off guard. Finally, the perspective shifts to a wide shot of the luxurious high-rise apartment. The atmosphere is heavy with awkwardness. The man has turned his back and is walking away, his hands clenched into fists, appearing either frustrated or perhaps trying to hide his own reaction to her struggle. In the background, near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glowing city, the woman stands hunched over, still coughing into her hand. On the marble coffee table, the bottle of whiskey and a lone glass sit as the silent culprits of the scene. The man stands in the center of the room, his back partially turned as he looks down at the floor. A thought bubble above him reveals his internal monologue. "I thought so." It is a moment of quiet confirmation. He knew the drink would be too much for her, yet he allowed her to test her limits, watching as she struggles in the background. The focus shifts to a tight close-up of the man's hands as he grips a plastic water bottle. His fingers are wrapped firmly around the container, which is labeled with a subtle 6.0 mark. This small, practical object becomes the centerpiece of the scene, a necessary peace offering to soothe the burning throat of his companion. The man approaches the woman, who is still hunched over and visibly distressed by a lingering cough. His expression is calm, almost softening as he holds the bottle out to her. "Here, have some water," he says, his voice likely dropping to a more caring tone. Between her gasps for air, she manages to wheeze out a small, grateful reply. "Thank you." In an intimate mid-shot, the two characters stand close together. The man looms over the woman, holding the water bottle steady as she reaches out to take it. Her hands are small compared to his, and she seems almost frail as she leans toward him for support. There is a palpable shift in the air. The earlier tension of the strong drink is replaced by a moment of quiet, shared vulnerability. The tension finally breaks with a touch of dry humor. The woman, desperate to extinguish the fire in her throat, tilts her head back and begins to drink the water with the same frantic energy she used for the alcohol. Loud gulp sound effects fill the air once more. Watching her, a small, knowing smirk plays on the man's lips as he remarks, "You downed your drink, and now you're doing the same with your water." The atmosphere is heavy with unspoken tension against a backdrop of shimmering city lights. He looks down at her, his voice tinged with a mix of observation and perhaps a hint of teasing as he points out her clumsiness. "And you're spilling it everywhere, too," he remarks. She looks up, her eyes wide and slightly glazed, a faint flush creeping across her cheeks as she realizes her lack of composure. She stands there, frozen for a moment, clutching a plastic water bottle with both hands as if it were an anchor. A stray droplet of water clings to her chin, trailing down from her lips, a clear sign that her attempt to hydrate has been less than graceful. Her expression is a dazed mix of embarrassment and disorientation, the sparkling, bokeh-filled night behind her only highlighting her disheveled state. "Ah!" A soft, breathy sound escapes her as the reality of her situation sinks in. Instinctively, she raises her hand to her face, trying to wipe away the spill with the back of her wrist. Her head tilts down, her long, wavy auburn hair falling forward to shield her burning face from his piercing gaze. She is visibly flustered, her movements hurried and slightly uncoordinated. The man watches her struggle, his expression unreadable but his thoughts sharp. He doesn't offer to help immediately. Instead, he studies her face with a cool, analytical intensity. A thought bubble appears above him, revealing his internal monologue. Maybe her mouth is small. It's a dry, almost clinical observation that contrasts sharply with her chaotic energy. Feeling the weight of his stare and the sting of her own awkwardness, she turns her head away. A visible frown is etched on the panel as she bites her lip, her hand still hovering near her mouth in a defensive gesture. A single bead of sweat rolls down her neck. She looks deeply troubled and self-conscious, caught in a moment of vulnerability under the watchful eye of someone who seems far too composed.
The man stands firmly, his gaze unwavering as he addresses the woman. Tired of the hesitation and the messy distractions with the water bottle, he decides to cut through the tension. "That's enough," he says, his voice low and commanding. "Let's do it now." His expression is serious, signaling that the time for games or accidents has come to an end. As if to mask his true intentions, or perhaps to further fluster her, the man lets a small, knowing smirk play on his lips. He raises a hand to his chin in a thoughtful, almost mocking gesture. "Do what?" he asks innocently, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Have a drink?" He is clearly enjoying the power he holds over the situation, leaning into the ambiguity of his previous statement. The woman stands her ground, refusing to let his teasing go unanswered. She looks him directly in the eye, her posture rigid as she fights back against his playful deflection. "You know that's not why I came," she retorts, her voice steady despite the previous embarrassment. The distance between them in the room feels charged, a silent battle of wills playing out on the wooden floor. The man doesn't back down. Instead, he shifts the pressure back onto her. The scene focuses on their feet, her in soft indoor slippers and him in dark socks, illustrating the intimate yet confrontational setting. He poses a sharp, pointed question. "Then what exactly did you come here to do with me?" He is forcing her to voice the very thing they have both been dancing around. On a nearby table, a bottle of whiskey and a glass sit untouched, shimmering under the soft room lights. The man continues to press his advantage, stating coldly, "Don't pretend you don't know. You called me here knowing what I meant." Internally, the woman is fuming. A small, chibi version of her appears in her mind, shouting in frustration, "He's teasing me even though he knows everything." She realizes she's being walked right into a trap of her own making. The scene opens with a quiet, lingering tension sitting on a polished tabletop. A bottle of Juk Ojigo whiskey and a half-filled glass catch the dim ambient light, suggesting a night meant for reflection or perhaps a difficult conversation. A plastic water bottle stands nearby, a stark, mundane contrast to the heavy atmosphere. A small, playful, chibi-style icon of a man appears with a speech bubble that challenges the current mood, simply stating, "Not so sure about that." The focus shifts to a close-up of a hand, fingers poised midair as if punctuating a point or reaching out to bridge the distance between two people. The background is a soft, textured blue, making the pale skin of the hand stand out. Above the hand, a speech bubble carries the weight of a serious realization. "I don't know what you were thinking when you came, but..." The sentence hangs in the air, unfinished and heavy with implication. Finally, we see a striking close-up of the woman's face. Her large, amber-colored eye is wide with a mix of surprise and apprehension. A hand, presumably the man's, reaches into the frame. A single finger gently touches her cheek. The intimacy of the gesture is startling. A jagged impact speech bubble sits near her hair, representing her internal jolt of shock.
The world seems to shrink down to just this single point of contact, leaving her breathless and uncertain of what comes next. The perspective widens to show the two protagonists. A tall, handsome man in a crisp gray dress shirt leans in toward a woman with long, wavy, reddish-brown hair. He looms over her, not with aggression, but with a dominant, magnetic presence. His expression is calm yet calculated as he looks down at her. A large speech bubble dominates the upper frame, offering a temporary truce, or perhaps a new beginning. Why don't we start by talking? The camera angles down, capturing the physical proximity between the two. The woman stands pressed slightly back against a surface, her hands clasped nervously near her chest. The man stands firm, one hand tucked casually into his trouser pocket, closing the physical gap between them. On the table in the foreground, the whiskey and water bottles reappear, grounding the high-stakes emotional moment in the reality of the room they share. The perspective shifts to a high-angle bird's-eye view of the room, emphasizing the physical and emotional distance between the two. The man sits deeply in a plush armchair, arms crossed defensively over his chest, his posture radiating a mix of authority and weariness. Across from him, the woman is barely visible at the edge of the frame, seated near a round marble table where a single bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses remain untouched. A massive speech bubble looms over the scene, carrying his blunt observation. Come to think of it, we don't even know what we want from each other. The camera pulls in closer, framing the man's stern but composed face as he looks directly toward the woman. His gray dress shirt is slightly unbuttoned at the collar, suggesting the night has been long and taxing. He maintains his crossed-armed stance, a barrier that shows he is not yet ready to trust. With a steady gaze, he proposes a path forward. So I'd like to talk about that. How does that sound? The focus drops to the tabletop, where the dark amber liquid in the whiskey bottle catches the cool, purple-hued light of the room. Beside it, a glass with a large ice cube sits waiting. The woman's shoulder and hair enter the frame as she finally responds to his proposal. Her answer is short, concise, and professional, masking whatever emotions she may be feeling. Very well. Against the backdrop of a glittering city skyline through a large window, the man seizes the initiative. He does not waste time with pleasantries, moving straight to the heart of their conflict. The speech bubbles reflect his commanding tone as he addresses her formally. Then let me ask the first question. What exactly do you want to do, Miss So-young? The final scene looks out over the sprawling, blurred lights of the metropolis, reflecting the complexity and coldness of their situation. The man's voice continues, sharp and piercing as he asks the ultimate question. Is revenge your only goal? The woman is left to repeat the word under her breath, her thoughts trailing off in a moment of heavy silence. My goal. The story begins with a close-up of a woman with long, wavy mahogany hair. Her expression is solemn, eyes cast slightly downward as if she is making a cold, calculated decision. She utters a single name that carries a heavy weight, is Dongsong. The atmosphere is tense, suggesting that this man, Dongsong, is the central figure in a plan she is about to set in motion. The perspective shifts slightly, focusing on the woman's determined profile. The soft lighting of the room contrasts with the harshness of her internal thoughts. She isn't just looking for an apology or a simple confrontation. Her intentions are much more destructive. The text bubble reveals her dark resolve. I want to completely crush his pride. It is clear that she has been deeply wounded or insulted, and she intends to strike back where it hurts him most. The scene transitions to a man lying down, looking physically exhausted and emotionally drained. Beads of sweat or tears are visible on his skin, suggesting a moment of intense vulnerability. In the background, a woman, perhaps the narrator, stands in a doorway, looking back. The man's thoughts drift to a painful memory of a rejection or a critique he once received. He said that I was as cold as stone. This comparison to an unfeeling object seems to haunt him, serving as the catalyst for his current state of mind. As the man remains in his state of distress, his eyes are closed tight in frustration. He is struggling with the label that has been placed upon him. He refuses to accept the narrative that he is a cold person without a heart. His internal monologue takes on a tone of desperate defiance as he thinks, "But I want to prove to him that's not true." He is driven by a need to reclaim his humanity and show that his behavior was not a reflection of his true character. The final image is abstract and chaotic, filled with textures of static and shattered fragments, mirroring a fractured psyche or a breaking point. The man's thoughts reach a final, firm conclusion. He seeks to externalize the fault, convincing himself that his past actions were a reaction to outside circumstances rather than a personal failing. The text reads that the reason I seemed that way wasn't my problem. It is a final plea for vindication, suggesting that his coldness was merely a symptom of a situation he couldn't control.
The abstract imagery of shattered glass continues from the previous moment, symbolizing a final break from the past. The man's internal monologue reaches its definitive conclusion as the words, "but his," appear amidst the fragments. He has successfully shifted the burden of guilt away from himself, deciding that the problem lies entirely with the other person. The scene shifts to a formal, dimly lit setting where a man with dark, styled hair and a sharp gaze stands with his arms crossed. His posture is authoritative and questioning as he looks toward his companion. He cuts straight to the logistics of their plan, asking with cold curiosity, "So, have you thought about how to do that?" In a close-up that emphasizes his crossed arms and rigid stance, the man reveals that he was already on the same wavelength as the woman. His response is calm and somewhat dismissive of any hesitation, stating, "Yes, I was actually going to bring it up." This highlights their shared focus and the deliberate nature of the scheme they are about to execute. The woman with wavy mahogany hair enters the frame, her expression thoughtful as she weighs her options. She admits that her chosen method might seem dated, but she prioritizes results over style. She explains her logic. "It's a bit old-fashioned, but I couldn't think of anything more effective than an audio recording." This reveals that their plan involves capturing incriminating evidence to use as leverage. The sequence ends with a striking portrait of the woman. Her pale skin and reddish-pink eyes are framed by her flowing hair, and she wears elegant gold earrings. While her face appears calm and composed, there is an unmistakable intensity in her gaze. She stands ready, having finalized the details of the trap they are setting, prepared to use the recording to achieve the crushing of pride she previously desired. In the first image, the focus shifts to a woman sitting in a state of visible tension. Her hands are tightly clasped over her knees, reflecting her inner turmoil and the weight of the request she is about to make. She addresses a man named Mr. Han, her voice filled with a mixture of desperation and respect. She begins tentatively, saying, "If you're okay with it, I'd like to ask for your help, Mr. Han." The soft lighting and her delicate posture emphasize the vulnerability of her position. The second image provides a closer look at her interlaced fingers, showing how much she is overthinking the situation. She is acutely aware of the ethical and professional boundaries she is asking him to cross. She acknowledges the unconventional nature of her plea, stating, "I know it's not exactly the kind of request I should be making to a prosecutor, but I don't have other options." The dialogue reveals that the man, Mr. Han, holds a position of high legal authority, making her request even more sensitive. In the third image, the woman continues to explain her plan, trying to provide reassurance that she has no ill intentions. She wants to use a recording for a specific purpose, but promises to handle it with the utmost discretion. She vows, "I'll play the recording only in front of Dongsong, then delete it right away without making any copies." To prove her transparency and build trust, she offers a compromise. "If you're worried, you can be there when I play it."
The fourth image shows a close-up of Mr. Han's eyes, which are sharp, observant, and contemplative. He is listening intently, weighing the consequences of her words. The woman suggests an even more secure method to put his mind at ease, proposing, "Or we can even use your phone to record it." This gesture is intended to show that she is willing to give him full control over the evidence to ensure it isn't misused. In the final image, the perspective widens to show both characters in the room. Mr. Han, seen in profile, finally speaks, raising a practical and professional concern. Despite her efforts to make the recording process secure, he questions the effectiveness of the plan itself. He asks, "Would that really do the job?" adding a layer of cold logic to the emotional atmosphere by noting, "But if it's only audio, it might not be convincing enough." His skepticism highlights the difficulty of the legal battle they are navigating. The woman pauses, her expression shifting from earnest plea to slight uncertainty as she processes the prosecutor's skepticism. She looks at him, her eyes wide and searching, while he remains partially obscured in the foreground, maintaining his professional yet intimidating presence. The atmosphere in the room grows heavy with the weight of what she is about to propose next, as she begins her reply with a soft, trailing, well... She gathers her courage to address the need for more convincing evidence. Her thoughts are laid bare in the dialogue bubbles as she explores a much more personal and potentially scandalous solution. She suggests that if visual proof is required, she is prepared to go to extremes, stating, "If we're talking a more visual proof, I can certainly pretend, so that's fine for me," before turning the implication back toward him with a pointed question. "But that might not be the case for you, right?" The impact of her suggestion hits Mr. Han instantly, visualized by a sharp ping sound effect above his head. His composed professional mask slips for the first time, replaced by a look of pure, wide-eyed bewilderment. A single bead of sweat rolls down his face as he stares at her, completely caught off guard by the audacity of her proposal to pretend in a visual recording with him. As the silence stretches between them, Mr. Han's shock turns into a defensive internal monologue. The narrative focus shifts to his torso as he likely crosses his arms or tenses up, his mind racing to interpret her words. He begins to wonder if her lack of hesitation stems from a lack of faith in his masculinity, indignantly asking himself, "Is she indirectly calling me impotent?" The sequence concludes with a close-up of the woman's face, which is now flushed with a pink hue of embarrassment, yet her brow is furrowed with genuine worry. She seems to have misinterpreted his shocked silence as a sign of his own physical or emotional insecurity. Looking down with a pained, empathetic expression, she wonders to herself if he could really perform the task with that face, her worried internal state creating a hilarious and awkward misunderstanding of his actual reaction. The man runs a hand through his hair, a gesture of deep frustration and weariness. He lets out a heavy sigh, his eyes closed as he processes the situation. He thinks to himself that hearing such words from Naeong was entirely predictable, yet it clearly still weighs on him. A close-up focuses on his broad chest and the sharp lines of his dress shirt, emphasizing his physical presence. The inner monologue continues with a cold, introspective realization. He admits to himself that he truly never felt a single spark or connection with her, highlighting the emotional void that has defined their relationship up to this point. The focus shifts to a tight, intense close-up of his eyes. There is a sharp, calculating glance as he begins to pivot his thoughts. The word "but" hangs in the air, signaling a turning point. He is no longer just reflecting on the past. He is starting to evaluate the person standing right in front of him with newfound scrutiny. We see Miss So-young, her face flushed with a slight blush, and her expression filled with a mix of anxiety and uncertainty. A bead of sweat trickles down her face as she waits for his reaction. Above her, the man's internal narrative concludes with a shift in perspective. This might be different. He is beginning to see her not just as another person, but as someone who might actually break his streak of indifference. The scene transitions to a wide view of a sprawling city at night, shimmering with countless lights through a large window. The man's voice breaks the silence, speaking aloud now. He sets a challenge for her, addressing her formally. Then, let's see if you can actually pretend, Miss So-young. He makes his terms clear. Before he commits to working with her, he needs proof that she is a believable actress capable of playing the part he requires.
Miss So-young agrees to the man's challenge, but with a slight hesitation. She reaches out, her hand trembling slightly as she prepares to take a seat at the table. To calm her nerves and build up the courage for the performance ahead, she makes a small request. "Very well, but first, I'd like a drink. It's hard to do this sober." The man remains composed and unbothered by her request. As she reaches for a bottle of whiskey, he gives her his permission with a nonchalant wave of his hand. "Do whatever makes you comfortable," he replies, his voice steady. The label on the bottle is clear, indicating a strong drink for someone clearly out of their element. Without a second thought, Miss So-young tilts her head back and begins to chug the drink in large, desperate gulps. The man watches her from across the table, his arms crossed over his chest in a skeptical posture. He watches her with a judgmental eye, thinking to himself that, based on his earlier observations, she clearly isn't much of a drinker. Predictably, the strong alcohol hits her system immediately. The panel shows her coughing and choking as the liquid goes down the wrong way. She gasps out between fits of coughing. The man watches the scene with a tired, almost bored expression, his inner monologues sighing, "There she goes again," as if her clumsiness is becoming a pattern. Despite the chaos, a small, knowing smirk plays on the man's lips. He looks at her with a mix of amusement and a hint of a challenge. He leans in slightly, his tone teasing as he remarks, "Had I known you liked to drink, I would have given it to you straight." He seems to be enjoying her struggle, using the moment to keep her off balance before their work truly begins. The evening takes an awkward turn as the young woman finds herself under a watchful gaze. She lets out a light, nervous cough, her cheeks flushed with a soft pink hue, perhaps from the alcohol or the mounting embarrassment. Looking downward to avoid direct eye contact, she quickly tries to justify herself. "No, it's not that I like drinking," she murmurs, her voice trailing off as she attempts to downplay her current state. Despite her protests, the alcohol is clearly beginning to take its toll. She sits with a pained expression, one eye squinting as a sharp pang of discomfort hits her. Her hand trembles slightly as she grips a glass of amber liquid, the condensation slick against her skin. A single bead of sweat rolls down her temple, signaling that she has reached her limit, yet she remains stuck in the moment, struggling to maintain her composure. In a sharp contrast to her visible distress, the scene shifts to a close-up of her companion. Only the lower half of his face is visible, a sharp jawline and a mouth set in a firm, inscrutable line. He remains silent, offering no words of comfort or judgment, represented only by an ellipsis in a thought bubble. His stoic presence adds a layer of tension to the room, leaving her words hanging heavily in the air. The world begins to tilt. The woman reaches up, pressing her palm against her forehead as if she could physically steady the spinning room. "Ah, I feel dizzy," she thinks to herself, her eyelids drooping with exhaustion. She is no longer concerned with appearances. Her body is heavy, and the bright, modern interior of the room feels like it's closing in on her. The dizziness has become overwhelming, stripping away the last of her energy. The sequence ends with a quiet, decisive sound. With a shaky hand, she finally sets her glass down on the table with a dull clink. The frame focuses on her slumped posture as she sits on the edge of the plush chair, her fingers splayed weakly against the surface. The thought bubble reveals her inner regret. I thought the alcohol would help, but now I've just got a headache. It is a moment of somber realization. The temporary escape she sought has only left her feeling worse than before. The silence is finally broken, but not with the comfort she hoped for. The man looms over her, his broad shoulders filling her field of vision as he poses a question that carries a heavy weight of expectation. "So, are you ready now?" he asks. His tone is calm, yet the directness of the inquiry catches her off guard, forcing her to look up at him through a haze of physical discomfort and mounting anxiety. Caught in the spotlight of his gaze, she falters. Her hand instinctively rises toward her chest, a defensive gesture as she tries to find the right words to navigate the situation. Well, she begins, her sentence trailing off into uncertainty. Her expression is a mix of apprehension and hesitation. She is clearly looking for an escape, or at the very least, a way to slow down the relentless pace of the evening. The world continues to spin, represented by the swirling, wavy patterns in the background, and the word dizzy floating in her mind. A deep flush has spread across her cheek, but it's no longer just the alcohol, it's the intrusive thought of what is about to happen. To think I'm about to do something like that with him, she thinks, her internal monologue filled with a sense of disbelief and overwhelming pressure. The reality of her situation is finally sinking in, clashing with her physical weakness. Her focus narrows as her strength continues to wane. The camera zooms in on her collarbone and the soft curve of her neck, highlighting her vulnerability. She can barely manage a whisper, a simple escaping her lips. The dizziness is no longer a background sensation, it is a primary force, making every thought and every word feel like an immense struggle as she remains trapped in the gravity of his presence. The tension reaches a breaking point as her internal panic manifests physically. Her hands rest on the table, but they are far from steady. A sharp rattle sound effect emphasizes her uncontrollable shivering. The glass sits nearby, a reminder of the drink that failed to steady her nerves. Finally, she manages to voice a desperate request, her words appearing in a speech bubble. "If you could give me more time." It is a fragile plea for a reprieve, a hope that she can delay the inevitable for just a little longer. A moment of elegance is suddenly shattered by a clumsy mistake. Miss So-young's eyes widen in sheer panic as she realizes what has happened. She clutches her hand to her chest, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Uh-oh," she gasps, looking down at the mess on the floor. Oh, the whiskey. The realization that she has spilled a drink in such a formal setting sends a wave of anxiety through her. Trying to maintain her composure, So-young immediately moves to rectify the situation. Her expression softens into one of sincere regret as she leans slightly forward, her long, wavy auburn hair cascading over her shoulders. She speaks quickly, hoping to minimize the disturbance. "I'm sorry, let me clean that up." Despite her poise, the small beads of sweat on her face betray how flustered she truly feels. Before she can move to clean the spill, a deep, commanding voice cuts through the air, stopping her in her tracks. The tone is firm and carries an undeniable weight of authority. "Miss So-young,
the man says, his voice dropping to a low, serious register. I'm not the patient type. The words hang heavy in the air, shifting the atmosphere from a simple accident to a moment of intense tension. So-young freezes, her breath hitching in her throat. She looks up, her gaze meeting the man who has now stepped firmly into her personal space. From her perspective, he appears towering and formidable, his hand resting heavily on a nearby surface. All she can manage to whisper is a faint, "Ah," as she realizes that his lack of patience might lead to consequences far more serious than a spilled drink. The silence that follows is punctuated only by the heavy, rhythmic sound of footsteps. Clump, clump. The man turns and begins to walk away, his stride purposeful and intimidating. He leaves his sentence trailing off, "So why don't you?" leaving the rest of the threat or demand unspoken. The sound of his boots echoing against the floor signals the end of the encounter, leaving So-young alone with her thoughts and the mess she is yet to clean.
The scene begins with a moment of sharp, jarring movement. A large sound effect, yank, dominates the frame as the woman is suddenly pulled forward. Her eyes are wide with shock, her pupils dilated as she tries to process the abrupt change in her surroundings. Her mouth hangs slightly open, capturing the breathless surprise of the moment. The perspective shifts to a wide shot against the backdrop of a glittering city skyline at night. The man has cornered the woman against a large glass window, his silhouette imposing, yet desperate. He leans in close, his arm raised and pressed against the glass to block her path, effectively trapping her in his space. An exclamation mark in a speech bubble highlights her stunned silence as the tension between them reaches a breaking point. The tension finally snaps into action. The man leans down, tilting his head to close the distance and pressing his lips against hers. It is a firm, emotional kiss. The woman's eyes remain open for a heartbeat, flickering with a mix of surprise and rising emotion. The soft, purple-hued lighting of the room enhances the intimacy of the embrace. The focus tightens into an extreme close-up of the kiss. The sound effect, chew, the light sound of a kiss, appears above them. This frame emphasizes the softness and the gravity of the physical connection, stripping away the background and focusing entirely on the intimacy of their meeting lips. As they pull apart just slightly, a heavy, shaky breath escapes. The man's internal thoughts, or perhaps a whispered question, appear in a jagged speech bubble. Stop talking? It suggests that the kiss was a way to silence the words that were causing pain or conflict between them, replacing an argument with a raw display of affection. Finally, the man is shown in a close-up, looking directly at the woman and the reader. His face is flushed with a deep blush, and his expression is a complex mix of intensity, longing, and vulnerability. His shirt is slightly disheveled at the collar, and his eyes are heavy with unspoken feelings, showing that he is just as affected by the moment as she is. Following the heavy silence of their first kiss, the woman looks up at the man, her expression still clouding with uncertainty and lingering shock. She gathers her courage and poses a soft, tentative question that breaks the quiet. Could we start on the bed? The man looks down at her, his posture relaxed as he leans over her, listening intently to her request. The man responds by moving even closer, his presence overwhelming and certain. He reaches out to take her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers in a firm yet gentle grip. With his other arm still braced against the wall, he looms over her, his gaze locked onto her blushing face. The woman looks away slightly, her cheeks flushed a deep pink, visibly flustered by the deliberate intimacy of his touch. In a moment of heightened sensory focus, the man's hand moves from her hand to her face. The sound effect, press, appears as he places a single finger against her lower lip, tracing the edge of her mouth with a slow, provocative motion. A small speech bubble containing only an exclamation mark underscores her silent, breathless reaction to this bold gesture. The man finally speaks, his voice likely low and steady. A slight knowing smile plays on his lips as he looks down at her with an expression of dark affection. He acknowledges her earlier request with a simple, decisive phrase, "As you wish." His eyes are sharp and focused, indicating that he is now fully in control of the direction the night will take. The scene culminates in a close-up of the man as he prepares to follow through on his promise. He continues to cradle her face and neck, his large hand emphasizing the physical difference between them. His smile remains charming yet predatory as he leans in to bridge the final gap between them once more. The soft, sparkling lighting around them highlights the romantic and charged atmosphere of the room. The scene opens with a soft, heavy plop, the sound of a body hitting a plush surface. A cascade of long, wavy, rose-colored hair fans out across the white sheets like spilled ink, vibrant against the pale bedding. The dramatic spread of her hair signals a moment of surrender, framing her head as she is pressed down into the mattress, marking the beginning of a tense, intimate encounter. The perspective shifts to a close-up of the two characters. A dark-haired man looms over the woman, his face dangerously close to hers. He wears a confident, almost predatory smirk, his eyes locked onto her as he whispers, "Now, may I continue?" The woman lies beneath him, her face flushed with a deep crimson blush. Her expression is a complex mixture of shock, hesitation, and a dawning realization that she has lost control of the situation. The man's dominance is fully realized as he pins her down. One of his hands is firmly planted near her head, while the other grips her waist, pulling her body flush against his. The woman's hand is balled into a tight fist against the pillow, a sign of her inner turmoil and nervousness. The physical tension between them is electric, highlighted by the glittering, hazy atmosphere of the room. The focus narrows onto the man's face, catching a rare moment of his own vulnerability. His eyes are lowered, shadowed by his dark lashes, and a faint tint of pink touches his cheeks. Despite his outward confidence, his internal monologue reveals a sense of gravity. "I'm really about to do this." He is fully aware of the line he is about to cross, and for a split second, the weight of the moment hangs heavy in the air. The narrative tension reaches its breaking point with a devastating revelation. As the camera focuses on the man's torso and the closeness of their bodies, the woman's inner voice completes the thought that changes everything. The realization hits with the force of a physical blow. She is engaging in this forbidden intimacy with none other than my sister's boyfriend. This final thought recontextualizes the entire scene, turning a moment of passion into a scandalous betrayal. A heavy silence fills the room as the woman stares blankly at the ceiling, her long, rose-colored hair fanned out against the pillows. Despite the physical intimacy of the moment, her eyes are clouded with a deep, haunting uncertainty. A single bead of sweat rolls down her temple as she confronts the gravity of her choices, her internal voice whispering the question she can no longer ignore. Is this really the right thing to do? The conflict between her desires and her conscience is laid bare in her hesitant gaze. The tension manifests physically in a sharp, sudden movement. A hand reaches out, fingers digging into the fabric of a shirt or the softness of skin with a desperate squeeze. It is a gesture of both longing and anxiety, a silent plea for grounding in a moment that feels like it's spinning out of control. The force of the grip reflects the intensity of the emotions they are both trying to navigate.
The scene shifts into a grainy, almost dreamlike memory or a simultaneous moment of passion. A light-haired man is seen leaning over a woman, their bodies close in an intimate embrace. Above them, a dark speech bubble carries a confession that feels both tender and treacherous. "I love you, Na-young." The use of her name makes the betrayal feel personal and permanent. The scene opens with a close-up of a man, his expression heavy and eyes closed, as if lost in a moment of illicit intimacy. Behind him, the stark shadow of a doorway reveals a silent observer, a woman standing in the hall, witnessing a scene that shatters her world. The man's voice, captured in a dark speech bubble, carries a cruel longing. "If only So-young were as gentle as you." As the perspective shifts, we see a lone figure, perhaps So-young herself, lying perfectly still on a raised platform, looking small and isolated against a vast, cold background. The dialogue continues to twist the knife, revealing the man's deep resentment and the stinging comparison he makes between the two sisters. "Your older sister's cold as stone. Even in bed, I feel nothing with her." The scene begins with a chilling lack of empathy. High above a framed wedding portrait, a speech bubble rings out with mocking laughter. The voice dismissively agrees with a previous insult, casually dehumanizing the woman in question with a cold, "Yeah, she's kind of like that." The narrative lens shifts downward to focus on a beautiful wedding photograph, showing a bride and groom smiling warmly at each other amidst cherry blossoms. However, the sentiment is immediately shattered by a brutal caption overlaid on the image. A voice asks rhetorically, "Right? I thought she was a corpse or something," highlighting the deep-seated contempt hidden behind their public facade of happiness. The atmosphere turns dark and heavy, the background fading into a grainy obsidian void. The dialogue becomes a series of sharp, invasive questions that probe into the trauma of a failing relationship. One bubble asks, "Did Dong-sung beat you?" Followed immediately by the soul-crushing inquiry, "Cheat on you?" The focus shifts to an older man, his face etched with severe lines of anger and uncompromising authority. He looms over the scene, his brow furrowed as he barks a command that places corporate interest above personal suffering. He declares with absolute finality, "Whatever the reason, you have no right to say no to Dong-eum Group." The confrontation reaches its peak as the older man's aggressive posture is fully revealed. With an icy glare and a mouth set in a hard line, he points a finger directly at the person he is berating. It is a gesture of total dominance, showing a man who views his family members not as people, but as chess pieces in a cold corporate game. The scene opens with a tight, intimate close-up of her eyes. Her gaze is downward, heavy with a mixture of hesitation and a deep, underlying sorrow. The subtle blush on her cheeks isn't one of simple shyness, but of a feverish internal conflict. In this moment of silence, the world seems to shrink down to the space between her and the person standing before her. Her eyes lift slightly, gaining a glimmer of painful determination. The internal monologue reveals the gravity of her situation. "This is the only choice I have left." It is the look of someone who has been backed into a corner by life, realizing that the path ahead is dangerous, yet unavoidable. The jagged edges of the speech bubble emphasize the sharp, sudden clarity of her desperation. The focus shifts to him, a man whose presence is both captivating and perilous. As he leans in, his expression is unreadable, yet intense. The finality of her decision is laid bare in the text, to start an affair with him. This isn't just a choice, it is a transgression, a leap into the unknown that will change the course of her life forever. The tension breaks into physical action. He reaches out toward her, his hand moving through the soft, hazy light of the room. The sound effect, reach, punctuates the air, signaling the closing of the distance between them. There is a sense of gravity to his movement, as if he is claiming the choice she has just mentally made. Finally, we see her, lying back, her long, wavy hair sprawling across the white sheets like silk. Her expression is a complex blend of vulnerability and defiance. She looks up at him, her lips slightly parted, and delivers the decisive blow to her own conscience. With the simple, breathy command, "Go on," she invites the chaos in, surrendering to the path she felt forced to take.
The scene opens with a striking visual of her lying back, her long crimson-hued hair fanning out across the pillows. Her eyes are wide and filled with a complex mixture of fear and longing, her cheeks flushed with a deep, unmistakable heat. In a gesture of both vulnerability and surrender, she reaches her hand upward, her fingers slightly curled as if beckoning or seeking an anchor in the storm of her emotions. The perspective shifts to a close-up of him, his dark, sharp eyes narrowing as he watches her every move. He is a man accustomed to reading others, and in this moment, he sees past her trembling exterior. His internal monologue confirms what he sees. So she's made up her mind. He recognizes that she has crossed a mental threshold from which there is no turning back. The physical distance between them finally vanishes. Her hand makes contact with his face, the sound effect touch echoing the significance of the moment. Her voice is barely a whisper, yet it carries the weight of an urgent command. Hurry! It is the plea of someone who can no longer bear the agonizing tension of anticipation. In an intimate close-up, we see the true state of her composure. As her fingers grip the fabric of his shirt and brush against his skin, they are visibly shaking. The small, jagged lines around her hand illustrate a profound physical tremor. While her words were demanding, her body betrays the sheer terror and adrenaline coursing through her as she commits to this path. The sequence concludes not with an image, but with his final haunting observation. The jagged speech bubble pulses with the intensity of his thought, asking me to hurry even though she's trembling. He is struck by the contradiction of her behavior, how she is possessed by enough desperation to push him forward, even as her entire being shakes with the gravity of her choice. The atmosphere is heavy with unspoken tension as the man leans in, his face partially shrouded in shadow. A sharp, knowing smirk plays across his lips, a look that is as charming as it is dangerous. His dark hair falls over his eyes, masking with full expression, but the confidence in his posture suggests he has gained the upper hand in this psychological game of cat and mouse. With a cold, decisive tone, he delivers a final warning that echoes through the room. The speech bubble looms large. "Just so we're clear, I gave you one last chance to stop." The visual focus shifts to the woman's bare leg and the stark positioning of their bodies, emphasizing that the boundaries of their professional or casual relationship have just been irrevocably crossed. The city lights blur in the background, making the world outside feel distant and irrelevant. The final perspective is a dramatic, wide-angle shot that captures the full scale of their interaction. He has her pinned against a surface, his hand firmly gripping her wrist, while his other hand tilts her chin upward, forcing her to meet his eyes. The physical power dynamic is undeniable. They are locked in a silent battle of wills, where the air is thick with anticipation, and the time for talking has finally come to an end. He moves closer still, his gaze fixed intensely on her.
He calls her by name, Miss Se-young, his voice lightly a low murmur that vibrates in the small space between them. He reminds her of her own agency in this moment, stating firmly, "You're the one who turned it down." He is placing the weight of the upcoming consequences squarely on her shoulders, highlighting that she had the opportunity to walk away, but chose to stay. The camera zooms in on their faces, capturing the raw electricity of the encounter. So-yeon's face is flushed with a deep crimson blush, her eyes wide as she looks up at him, trapped between hesitation and desire. He hovers just inches from her lips, his expression softened by a triumphant yet intimate gaze. The soft lighting catches the shimmer of her floral earring, adding a touch of elegance to the high-stakes vulnerability of the scene. The man leans down, burying his face into the crook of her neck. The soft sound effect, chew, indicates a gentle yet deliberate kiss against her skin, drawing a startled gasp, "Ah!" from the woman. Her hand rests tentatively on his shoulder, her fingers curling slightly into the fabric of his shirt as she reacts to the sudden warmth of his breath against her. The physical contact deepens as a hand begins to slide slowly and purposefully across her skin. This tactical movement, accompanied by the word kiss, suggests a rhythmic progression of affection that is both captivating and overwhelming. Every touch is calculated to test the remaining boundaries of her resolve. Overwhelmed by the intensity of his proximity, the woman's body reacts instinctively with a visible flinch. Her eyes widen in a mix of surprise and rising heat, her face flushed a deep pink. She looks on with a stunned expression, indicated by the silent exclamation bubble, X, as the reality of his boldness fully sinks in. In a moment of internal panic, her thoughts race. The jagged, electrified thought bubbles scream, "Wait!" and "His hand!" as she realizes exactly where his touch is wandering. The scene focuses on the psychological weight of the moment, where her mind struggles to keep up with the physical sensations of the encounter. The sequence reaches a peak of physical intimacy as his hand finally comes to rest firmly against the bare skin of her thigh. The contrast between his pale hand and her skin is sharp, framed against the soft, out-of-focus city lights in the background. This gesture is possessive and final, leaving no room for doubt about his intentions or the direction the night is headed. The scene opens with a heavy atmosphere of intimacy and internal conflict. A man lies over a woman, his head tucked against her shoulder, while she stares blankly upward with a flush of intoxication on her cheeks. His thoughts are clouded by a specific memory. She said it's hard for her to do this sober. This realization hangs over him, suggesting that their closeness is fueled more by liquid courage than genuine readiness, adding a layer of melancholy to the moment. The perspective shifts to an extreme close-up of the moment their lips meet. The sound effect, chew, a soft, light kissing sound, accompanies the visual. It is a brief but impactful contact, a peck that marks the transition from hesitation to action. The soft pink hues and delicate line work highlight the gentleness of this initial touch. The tension breaks with a sudden, decisive movement. The frame focuses tightly on the woman's eye, which is wide with surprise. Above her, the bold onomatopoeia, press, appears, signaling that the man has moved closer, closing the physical gap between them. The sharp lines in the background emphasize the suddenness of his advance, catching her completely off guard as he leans in. As the kiss deepens, the woman's reaction is one of visible shock. Her eyes are wide open, fixed on the man who is now hovering inches from her face. A speech bubble containing muffled against his lips shows her breathlessness and surprise. Her hand rests tentatively on his shoulder, caught between pulling him closer or pushing him away as she processes the sudden intensity of the encounter. Finally, the shock begins to fade, replaced by a soft, hazy acceptance. Her eyes droop half-closed, losing their startled edge as she begins to sink into the kiss. A small, quiet moan, escapes her, drifting into the air. The man continues to lean over her, his dark hair contrasting against her vibrant red locks as the two of them become lost in the quiet, heated intimacy of the bedroom.
The intensity of their connection deepens, overwhelming her senses. Her eyes are squeezed shut, her long lashes brushing against her flushed cheeks, which are now a deep, vibrant pink. In the quiet of her mind, she is flooded with a thought of pure vulnerability. I've never felt this before. This admission highlights her internal transition from drunken hesitation to a raw, genuine emotional discovery. The sheer force of her newfound feelings manifests in a sudden, involuntary physical reaction. The frame focuses on her foot, which is tensed and arched sharply against the bedding. The word flinch floats above it in a soft pink script, surrounded by dynamic motion lines that emphasize the suddenness of the movement. This small detail captures the involuntary electricity coursing through her body as the intimacy escalates. Caught in a whirlwind of sensation, her hand instinctively reaches out for something to hold on to. Her fingers press firmly against the fabric of the man's shirt, the word press appearing in bold to signal the strength of her grip. A small, breathless gasp, escapes her lips, filling the speech bubble above as she struggles to anchor herself amidst the overwhelming waves of emotion. As the moment lingers, her hand remains clutched against his chest, but the grip begins to falter into a delicate tremble. Squiggly lines around her fingers indicate a visible shake, showing just how deeply affected she is by his proximity. The contrast between her pale, trembling hand and the stark lines of his shirt creates a visual representation of her vulnerability and the height of the tension between them. Finally, the man pulls back slightly, the heavy atmosphere broken by a long, weary sigh. He hovers just above her, his profile sharp and his expression unreadable as he exhales. Below him, she remains flushed and dazed, her mouth slightly parted as she stares up at him. This breath marks a momentary pause in their physical encounter, leaving the air thick with unspoken words and the lingering heat of their shared moment. The scene opens with a close-up of the woman lying against the white sheets, her long, wavy auburn hair fanning out around her. Her face is flushed with a deep crimson hue, and her eyes carry a look of dazed confusion and vulnerability. A soft escapes her lips, depicted in a small speech bubble as she tries to process the intensity of the moment. The air around her seems to shimmer with soft light and floating sparkles, emphasizing the heightened emotional atmosphere. As the tension escalates, the perspective shifts slightly. The woman is clearly overwhelmed, her internal monologue revealing her racing thoughts. This is all too fast, she thinks to herself, her breath hitching once again. She begins to ask a question, who, as if trying to make sense of the person before her or the words that were just spoken, but her thoughts are interrupted by the sheer speed of the unfolding events. The focus narrows in on the man's profile. His mouth is slightly parted, as if he is about to speak or has just let out a heavy breath. The sharp line of his jaw and the shadow falling over his face create a sense of mystery and intensity. This extreme close-up highlights the intimate proximity between the two characters, where even the smallest movement or sound carries significant weight. The camera pulls back to a wide shot, showing the man leaning over the woman on the bed, pulling her into a sudden, forceful hug. He is dressed in a formal white button-down shirt and black trousers, his back to the viewer as he buries his face in her neck. The woman looks startled, her eyes wide as she is pressed into the mattress.
Above them, a large speech bubble contains the man's demanding or surprised question. On Earth said that to you. The final frame maintains the wide shot of their intertwined figures on the bed. The woman's legs are visible, highlighting her small frame compared to his. The man remains hunched over her, gripping the sheets, while the woman is left in a state of complete shock. A single large speech bubble at the bottom of the frame captures her total bewilderment. What? The scene ends on this cliffhanger, leaving the nature of their conversation and the reason for his sudden outburst hanging in the air. The atmosphere in the room shifts from shock to a simmering, quiet intensity as the man remains hovered over her. His movements create a soft rustle against the bedsheets. The woman, her face still dusted with a soft pink blush, looks up at him with wide, searching eyes. He speaks in a low, steady voice, reminding her of their shared history. "You told me yourself," he says, grounding the chaotic moment in a truth she had once shared with him. The narrative voice turns internal and reflective through large, overlapping speech bubbles. He recounts her words with a hint of irony, that someone once called you cold as stone. However, his next words carry a heavy emotional weight, challenging that perception entirely. With a subtle, invisible smirk that can be felt in his tone, he adds, "They couldn't have been more wrong." This revelation hangs in the air, stripping away the cold facade she often presents to the world. The camera pulls back to reveal the full, breathtaking proximity of the two. The man has moved even closer, his large frame nearly enveloping hers as he pins her gently against the pillows. His dark hair falls forward as he stares down at her with an expression that is both commanding and deeply intimate. Beneath him, the woman is a picture of stunned vulnerability. Her hands are raised slightly, as if unsure whether to push him away or pull him closer, her eyes locked onto his in a moment of pure, raw connection. The focus shifts back to the woman's face, which is now completely flushed with a vibrant blush that spreads across her cheeks and ears. She looks dazed, her lips slightly parted in a silent gasp as she tries to process his intense gaze. Above her, his voice cuts through the silence once more, soft yet challenging, as he asks the final, piercing question. "Don't you agree?" The question is a trap, a plea, and a demand all at once. Finally, the scene narrows down to an extreme close-up of the man's eye. His gaze is sharp, dark, and unwavering, filled with a depth of emotion that words cannot fully capture. The subtle narrowing of his eyelid and the slight shadow over his iris suggest a man who is seeing exactly what he wants, a woman who is anything but stone. This intense, singular focus brings the tension to a boiling point, leaving the reader breathless for her response.